I'll have some water.
It's hot enough. You got to keep the water going.
Yes. So when you met Llew, was he always a good listener?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Okay. Are you as good a listener as he is?
Probably not.
You know, we're both interested in politics. And one of the first rules of politics, anywhere in the world, any culture, you got to listen.
Yeah, you do. That's
And
very true.
empathy.
And
Empathy.
apparently you do that. What did you do that as a little kid?
Yeah,
Did you
I
think
mean,
like a
I'm always interested in other people's story,
Okay.
and that always helped me. I mean, we'd go places, and I guess I never thought about it. You'd go places, and I'd always want to know the taxi driver's story. I'd want to know to me, it was always about the story. I was interested in the other person's story, how they got where they were, why they think what they think, you know, why they made the choices they made, how was the economy there, how were they interacting with it, and so I'm always interested in the story, and which genuinely helps. You know, if you understand the other person's perspective, doesn't mean you always agree with it, but at least if you begin by understanding their perspective, you can hold a discussion about it.
Yeah. You know, based on the articles you publish in the IO, I think of you as a fairly moderate person. Sometimes you're actually doing things with Democrats. Is that true? It seems.
Yeah,
like
I've always been business oriented, but the parties have shifted. The parties were never this far right or this far left, to be totally honest. And if it's if you think, and so my undergraduate was economics. I have a graduate degree in econometrics, applied mathematics, statistics. And so everything in I think of stuff fairly mathematical. And always have. But if you just think about the spectrum, Montana itself is a fairly moderate state. It's center right, it's to the right, but it's moderate. So you have a population of 100%, right? If you split that population in half, which is effectively what Montana is, a 50-50 state, and then you draw the curve again, well, the center of each party is already towards the polls. So just by being active enough, because the middle tends to be the soccer moms. They don't run for anything in the population curve. They tend to not be interested. So already you're probably farther right than the norm just by being willing to engage in politics,
Yeah.
or farther left of the norm.
Yeah.
But when I first got active, it seemed like the business centrist Republicans and what I would call the private labor, not the public labor, but the private labor, not the very environmental, the coal miners and the IBEW, those were more the controlling factors. And the center, the business Republicans and them, with the exception of some discussion of prevailing wage, tended to work together fairly well. And the extreme, on the far right, you have the succeed from the union, ban public education crew, and on the far left you have the man is a virus, nothing you can build or do is green enough or clean enough. Those two crews seem to dominate the tails. But what has happened, and it kind of began in the Republican Party with Ron Paul in the state when there was a Ron Paul government, is the tails suddenly became extremely active. So the tail of the Republican Party got active in the central committees. So while the state itself remains fairly moderate, the legislature itself, and a lot of those running for office tend to be much more extremely right. They're often libertarian. They're often folks that didn't classically meet the definition of Republican. And also on the left we have a very
Well, there's a socialist group.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid of that word, but there
Yeah.
are people who don't even want to say it.
But there are, and so the extremes have become prevalent, and it's largely through lethargy of the middle. I don't think the population itself is extreme. And if you look at this community or even the state of Montana, they want to pay reasonable taxes, but they want to have a good education system. They want you to be able to drill and produce natural resources without destroying the environment. They want a balance. But the extremes don't drive the bus down the middle. They're always...
Why do you think the extremes have evolved like this in Montana?
On the Republican side, when Ron Paul, remember when there was a chance he was going to be governor, he put his call out.
When he was going to be president.
President, I meant. he put a bunch of pressure out, and so it was going to be a process where the parties nominate. So it became apparent to those folks they needed to get on central committees, the much more evangelical extreme. And they're not all evangelical. I don't mean to infer that at all. But they became very active. They started trying to get on all the central committees. They tried to get in, and it suddenly dawned on them that if they are in control of the central committees, they can control the litmus test. So in Great Falls, when you come back home, the Ed Buttrey's, who's a fairly moderate type Republican, is villainized by his central committee, and the person that votes no on everything is a hero. And so and if you're not capable of withstanding that pressure, you tend to, in order to avoid being burned, you tend to move that direction. Mm-hmm. But I never seen it. It wasn't quite as bad this year as the last time, but I've never seen the polls so strong, where they're so, there's just an article in the Interlake where they're attacking Frank Garner, and it's just consistent that the extremes.
Do you respect him? Is he a good politician?
Garner's a good guy, because he's tried to do. To me, there's two types of people. There's make a statement, make a difference, and there's a lot of things that if in order to actually negotiate a deal to get it worked out, if you want to make a difference, you got to recognize that you're not going to get everything your way. Now, you can incrementally move stuff your way, but you can't get everything your way. And now, so I have two options. If I just want to stand up there and make a statement and scream the taxes are too high and just scream about it, I can make lots of statements, and there'll be people out there who agree with the statements, but I really haven't made much difference. I've just made statements. If I want to work at solving problems, then I have to be willing to engage in an honest negotiation. And I don't know, it's only in the last decade that if you negotiate a solution, that somehow negotiation is unprincipled. Well, again, if you throw your principles out the window, there's places you must never go, then it is unprincipled. But when you negotiate with your wife to get something done, when you negotiate in a business deal, it's all in negotiation. You can have a principled negotiation. Say, I can go here, but I can't go any further. Can you come to here? And I work with John Cecil out of Butte a lot. He's one of my good friends. He's a private labor.
He's a Democrat?
He's a private labor D. But, really the only thing I've seen John be much different than we are on politics is John would be more labor union orientated than I am. But John wants to build, he wants to drill, he wants to do things, he wants to do them responsibly. But if you're a private labor guy, you can't make a living if there's no coal mine. You can't make a living if there's no power line or no road. So he's willing to do. And interestingly, John is as disliked by his far left environmental D as I often can be by the Succeed from the Union ban education are.
Now, do you have some of those people in Andre County?
No, not. There's a few. They're not a dominating force here. There is definitely a few of those that they don't know
parts
what
of the state have more.
Kalispell. Kalispell has got a real big population. They moved in up there. Chuck Baldwin, there was a church crew and that moved in. There's an interesting book that's worth your time reading. Not so much about the water compact, but it talks about this by Edwin Berry. He's actually got a doctor's degree. He's
B-A-R-R-Y.
B-E-R-R-Y. Edwin Berry. And it's the last, I want to say it's the last Montana water compact, or the last. But he talks about talks about the shift in the Republican Party. Let me see if I can get the name right for you. But he talks about it very clearly. He talks about how he says that it's actually a group of he calls them very conservative evangelicals that came in, and they felt that the best way they can change everything is to take over the Republican Party. That not to, even though they're libertarian, even though they're not, and over in that area you see it at an extreme. Thank you, Edwin Berry. Let me see if I can get. But it's an interesting story about the compact. Look up Edwin Berry, and
We'll find it. We're both pretty good on Amazon.
Right?
Yeah, last
There
month.
you go.
It's But he talks
I've been
about
down to look up books. Okay, we'll do that.
It's-
And does he represent your point of view pretty well?
you know,
on-
it's
on water?
interesting. I don't know if he does on water or not. So he writes
water's a big deal.
Water is a big deal. He's so I would say the book was probably more realistic on. So if we want to talk about compact, we can do that. More realistic on how the party has divided
I see.
than anything else, because he speaks to that in there as well.
Okay.
When I first met Edwin Barry, he was busy being focused on access, and it was interesting. It was through the water compact process,
Yeah.
where no matter how much scientific data you put forth, no matter how much stuff you showed that. If you think about the compact, you know, I carried the Blackfeet one all those years ago. Is there was one glass of water, and the federal government gave it to the tribes, and the state gave it to the stakeholders of water. And there was one glass of water. Well, when we first started doing compacts, you could do it through efficiencies. You could line the ditches, you could do all sorts of stuff. You could make the one glass go serve 2 people. But now it's much harder to do that, and there's a much more aggressive response. Whether a guy liked the compact on the west side or not, it did focus all the lawsuits, all the energy into one area. And it'll spend some time in court and all that, but otherwise you'd have 16,000 cases go to court. You know, and so we had one glass of water given to the tribe and given to stakeholders. Somewhere we've got to negotiate a situation where the one glass serves 2 people. It's just how it is, you know. I'm not sure that was a perfect document. I kind of followed Chaz Vincent's lead on that, because everybody's kind of an expert in their own area, and Chaz spent probably 4 years of his life trying to get every one of those details down, and he's a thoughtful guy, you know, and so once he got to the point where he was fairly comfortable with it, then I reviewed what he said. I thought, all right, it's probably not perfect, but it's as
Do you
good as it
think
can get.
the present Secretary of Interior is in a better position now to do what you would like to see done than in the past with water?
Yeah, I like Zink. I think Zinke, nobody owns Ryan Zinke. I sat next to Zinke for a session. Zinke was a little bit of a wild man when he first got there, you know, because he came from the kind of a, you know, his approach to the world was to, I remember him telling the lobbyist, say that again and I'll end you. And I remember saying, hey, Zink, you know, he said, in the world I came from, they're going to find you in an alley and wonder what you died from. I said, you know, Zink, you may need to, that probably doesn't work so well today, buddy. But he's a good guy, and he may not always be right, but you're not arguing with some lobby group. You're talking to Ryan Zinke, and Zink's he wants to build and develop and do, but he's kind of that balanced approach. The far right hate Ryan Zinke. They think he's far too liberal.
On what issues is he liberal about? Do they see him as
They thought he was far too environmental. You know,
on water or on?
on everything from the park areas to they thought he was far too liberal. When we served together in the Senate, Zinke was my seatmate. They hated Zinke. He was not a Republican. He was a Democrat in disguise. They very much disliked Ryan Zinke.
Are there any Democrats that liked him at that time?
Oh, you know, again, it's a 4-party system. So did the
Okay.
extreme left like him? No, they thought he was far too right. But I would say the middle D and the middle R thought Zink was okay.
Do you know Robin Hamilton? He was a senator for a while, about 10 years.
Yeah, actually
Before
I
your
do.
time.
I actually do.
He became pretty moderate. He learned to work. Well, he came off a wheat ranch, and
Yes.
so his wife came off a wheat ranch. He came off of a small farm. But anyway, he's described it much the way you have. So when you get to exact situations, I think for both David and me, what's interesting is the individuals, what went through their heads in order to get to this 4-party system. And I don't know if you would use the word 4-party. I think there's 3 parties maybe.
But the D's are split too. But the party that's in power,
Yeah.
you see the split more visibly because they fight amongst themselves. The party that's in the minority unites because it's united against the party that's in power. But if you look at Jim Keene, and I remember Jim Keene's also out of Butte, a Butte D, a private labor D. He called me one time and says, man, oh man, you guys, being in the Republican, you guys can't lose the Senate. If you lose the Senate, we'll have to kill all of that environmental stuff that Bullock wants. This way we get to just vote for it and let you guys kill it, so no one's mad at us. So the D's are very divided, but there's no upside in them fighting amongst themselves because they're already in the minority. And so you see the R division much more clearly. But I mean, if you look at the presidential, you've seen the socialist version of the D versus the more moderate D. Although you didn't, it seems like both of them have moved farther left and further right on the tails, because it didn't used to be quite as visible as socialist D. But yeah, I see two D parties all the time. It's interesting, the extreme right and the extreme left vote together.
Now, you were involved in the Medicaid expansion.
Yes.
Can you describe a little of what happened there and how it happened?
The same exact thing. So the D's themselves were probably, all the D's were probably on that. But if you were the critical care access hospitals like the ones I represent, and all these small hospitals, whose board are the Republican Central Committees. I mean, these are Republican areas. These are all fairly Republican boards and all that. All the small access hospitals, because of the reimbursement rate in return, would not have survived because you didn't get reimbursed. The states that did not expand Medicare did not have sufficient reimbursement. Now, the bigs would have been all right. They liked the deal because we were spending $300 to $400 million anyway on people walked into the emergency rooms. You weren't denying medicine to anyone. That doesn't happen today. And so the question became, are you going to put all, in my area, I had the Cutbank, the Shelby, the Conrad, the Shoto, the Fort Benton. I had all these little hospitals. Was I going to put them at risk? Or were we going to try to do an expansion? And the one we did was the most Republican. We got more waivers than anybody else, and you have to apply to be trained to go to work. You have to pay a copay when you get to a certain income. We tried to do the most Republican version in the country and get as many waivers as we possibly could. Ed Buttrey led the charge on that, and so in the perfect world, do I like that style of medicine? Absolutely not. In the world we live in, where someone's not going to be denied care, and some justifiably have an issue. Others, you would like them to actually just get a job, but you're not going to be denied care. We tried to put together the best package that could be done in those days and times. But I also sit on the benefits board, so I can see the direct result on it in Great Falls. But there's two parts of the. Everybody lumps Medicaid expansion and Obamacare all into one. The Medicaid expansion actually has bought down premiums, but the actual insurance subsidy has worked poorly because so many people were willing to pay the fine, especially young people are not do it, that the insurance subsidy portion blew up. And that's the same thing they're finding in D.C. when they're fighting it now, that the actual expansion deal was not, seems to be doing okay. I think it can be done. There's certainly populations on there that you need to find a better way to restrict. If you block granted more to the states, give the states more authority to be able to actually charge some co-pays, you'd be better off because your hands get tied. But yeah, it was one of those deals that as a representative of this area, every hospital that I represented came to me and personally asked.
But the Montana showed that you could get copays under the present system.
We did get that through the waiver systems.
Have you had any indication that anybody else is following Montana's lead?
Yes, actually a bunch of the folks applied for the same model, and it's interestingly the discussion that's going on now at DC includes a lot of the stuff that came out of the model that we built here.
Oh.
And you could have debated that at a higher level, at a better level, if you could have stopped the extremes from trying to sabotage it, instead of hold an honest debate, because you kept trying to bring the bill up and hold an honest debate about what was good, what was bad, what could you do better, because it's through the multiple hearing process, because you don't think of everything. You know, more minds are better. But when you can't hold a debate, whenever you bring the bill up and then somebody tries to sabotage, you stick a poison pill in it, make it miss a deadline, we could never get the debate honest. It was always, can we come up with a trick to destroy the program? You know, and again, make a difference, make a statement. They walk around and make a statement. But again, the whole nation would not have supported something like this if there wasn't need. And now, it was really easy to insult that other program. But until you design another ship, you know, if that ship's sinking and there's a bad portion of that ship, the first thing you better discuss is what ship you're going to swim to before you bail in the ocean. You better figure out what the alternative is. Because if this is so bad and there's bad portion, I would suggest you fail forward. You look at what didn't work here and you redesign based upon what didn't work and try to throw it out. I think when you throw this out, all the problems that caused it to exist to begin with.
Are you kind of a lonely voice in the party on that? I mean, the way you express that right now is not what McConnell has been arguing.
Yeah, probably more so. Me and Eddie Buttrey. There's a group of us that tend to run together that we are the kind of the business.
And you check with one another, and you guys.
We talk all the time, and
Yeah.
we work on stuff and try to. But yeah,
You want to stop and eat?
No, that's fine. That's no problem.
He's got to get to Great Falls, to get a car, to get to Missoula, to get a plane,
No,
to get back
no.
to Seattle.
That's not, I can eat when we're done. That's no issue.
All right.
I've been a lonely voice many times on a lot of issues, but
Have you?
so far I survive.
When you were developing this in Montana, were you looking at the model of Indiana, or were you developing your own model?
We
or-
pulled about 3 of those more Republican-based models in. We looked at what they had done, and then we talked about what we could do. And the way our business, our group kind of works is everybody tries to have, there's a lead in each area, just like I mentioned, Chaslinson was the lead on the water compact. So we all pay attention to it, but one of us is charged with understanding it in detail. And so Eddie Buttrey was the Medicare in detail guy. And I don't think he's ever, I was senior, so I get to kind of assign who does what. I'm not sure he's really ever forgiven me for that, but I can tell you what, he understands his health care well, and he's knowledgeable to talk about it. And it's not just make a statement stuff. Eddie truly did the work, you know, and you remember the Buttrey systems and the Buttrey stores, and Eddie's a bright boy, well-versed, well-spoken, and did the work to try to make a difference. You know, didn't just talk about it, tried to do the work to make a difference, and we tried
When you
to
say
support it.
us in the Montana legislature, are you talking about just senators or House
No.
members too?
We have our group, it crosses both bodies.
Okay,
you know.
so what are there, 20, 30 people in that?
Yeah, usually around 30 that actively work
Okay.
away at that. That's kind of a Republican business caucus.
We better switch to education. We're going around out of
Well,
time.
just a minute. Were you the lead person on the gas tax increase?
Garner, Frankie was the
Right.
Frankie.
Garner.
Frankie, I was probably the lead in getting Frank on that, and you know, because I'm always senior. But Frankie was the lead on that, and then
But you were listed as a sponsor, weren't you?
in the Senate,
In the Senate,
but
yeah.
the bill started in the House, so
Okay.
I did a lot of the work on it. Yes, so it was, and the gas tax was negotiated the exact same way. I mean, we needed to come up. It was fairly obvious that when you cut through all the noise, Montana funds its roads purely on the gas tax. So when you compare us to Wyoming, who puts $900 million of other money in there, or Dakota, lots of people use something other than gas tax. So when you say this state's gas tax is higher, in cost per mile, it's actually one of the lowest states in the surrounding. But we just use only gas tax. We don't use a lot of other sources, you know. And so we wanted to have a system that took care of the roads. We needed to make MDOT was a little out of hand and needed some efficiency, so it actually took about a 9% personnel cut. You know, we tried to get MDOT to, because you had to deal with the expense side as well. And then we started taking a look at you freight in and freight out everything. You know, nothing's really here. You freight in diapers and you freight out weeds. You freight in everything's freight. So we tried to get diesel a little lower since we didn't, you know. So in the end, took the whole time to negotiate it, but it was all about trying to cut some expenses and add enough stuff to make the thing balance one more time. And Frankie did a good job. He stayed on it. It wasn't a pleasant thing. He's still getting beat up over it, but I don't know. He didn't do it for a popularity contest, I guess.
Is he likely to have problems getting reelected? Is he likely to try to get reelected?
Yeah, he'll try to get reelected. They'll try to attack Frank, but I would say Frank's a fairly dynamic personality. He's well thought of. So I mean, there was just an article in the Interlake attacking Frank, but I don't think you can beat Frank Garner. I think he's well liked, and no one thinks that Frank's doing anything. If you know Frank, you don't think Frank's doing stuff. Just wild carding it in.
Is your reelection at risk because of your stance?
Oh, they usually locate someone to run against me. But I had a job when I was looking for this one. I'm guessing that there's usually somebody that shows up that says I'm not extreme right enough, and often on schools, or I'm not.
Has that happened before?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And then they disappear after they lose? You don't
Yeah,
worry
or
about-
you get a different one next time.
Yeah.
It's school issues, all sorts of, it's...
Are you ever attacked for not being religious enough?
No, I'm usually, there's those that would probably feel I should target to social issues at a higher level. I just don't think you're going to change the outcome of abortion from Roe versus Wade and Helena. And the truth of it is if I look at those folks that go down there and that's their only issue, and they make a lot of noise,
Yeah.
they make a lot of statements, but nothing ever really changes, and so I'll often vote along a more Republican line. But if the only thing that I could do was go to Helena was make a lot of noise about social issues, then I'd stay home. I'm not interested in that. That's never been my cup of tea. I think that...
Can we segue to education?
Yeah.
Because since you're here, it's become an issue since Betsy DeVos has been appointed as to how much faith should play a role in through school charters in using tax money. And you're just getting up to this point about, which is interesting to me, about, I don't really know where Montanans, of course there are many kinds of Montanans, and here in Conrad I get a sense of civility, that people, you don't have to lock your house. I mean, you could go, you don't have to, Buck never locks his vehicle, and I know Buck why he doesn't do that, but I grew up, we never locked anything. So there's a sort of public morality that I associate with Montana, but I have no idea what it's like anymore. So let's start with how kids grow up. Are you pretty satisfied with the way kids are growing up now in Montana?
Well, since I can't influence how kids grow up, right? All I can influence is my interaction with them. So as long as my interactions of high expectations and high morale and morality and whatnot, those are my beliefs. And so I guess that's how I interact with kids, regardless of where they come from, right? Where they've grown up, how they've grown up, or whatever. But if that's my beliefs, then that's how I'm going to interact,
Yeah.
regardless of whether they've changed.
Do you think
from
you're
10
pretty
years or whatever.
traditional in that regard here in Conrad?
Yeah, we are. We
Okay.
are real traditional here in Conrad.
So you don't think Conrad schools need to change very much to, I don't mean that in any negative way, but because I know they do need change to keep up with technology. But
Right.
the way ethics or social studies or geography, whatever it is that gives them a sense of the world, does that need to change from the past, or is it okay the way it is now?
Well, with any time you're going to change with your surroundings. I think right now you're looking at changes in public schools because your workforce that's coming out in the business sector is doing different things, right? So they're not working in a factory putting a bolt on. this is the way it's always going to be, then you're in trouble. You know, you're not helping the students
And
because it is about them.
Montana, you were on the statewide school board or what?
The school board association,
Yeah.
yes.
And you were the state president.
I was, yes.
Is that a generally felt view among the school board? or, I mean, were you seen as, I mean, you're a little bit of a shaker, I would guess. You don't sit there and just agree with everything.
No, I didn't.
Did people see you as more conservative or more liberal? More progressive or more regressive?
You know, I don't. The school boards are an interesting thing because you don't necessarily see conservative and liberal a lot.
Okay.
What you see is focus difference, a focus on how much money can we get, or a focus on what can we do for the kids. It seems like it merges. I don't know, Lou. How would you describe it?
No, the school boards. Carol made a difference on the school board association. So let's step this back. But again, numeric wise, I would be in the argument you should always begin with what is, right? So there was like 2,523 charters. I looked at all the charters. I looked at all their numbers because that's what I would do. I would look at the statistics, and I can tell you there's as many charter schools that fail, and fail horribly, as public schools. In fact, the failure rate's slightly higher. Now, you'd have to correct some for population. But the truth is you have outstanding charters, you have failing charters, you have outstanding public schools, you have failing public schools. You know, and so I would argue that rather than spend all the argument on...
Sorry to interrupt. Are you guys doing okay? Do we need any drink refills or anything?
Rather than focus the argument on whether the charter is better or whether the public is better or whether that, I would argue that you focus on the model that works the best. And if you want to hit the ball like Babe Ruth, go look at how he swings the bat. And if a charter school somewhere is doing something that's producing enhanced student outcomes, then take a look at what they're doing, and whether you're public or charter, adopt it. And if a public's doing it, you adopt that. And if you drop the best of practices, that should be the focus. It should be about the best of practices to enhance student opportunity and student achievement.
But you know that Babe Ruth was accountable for Babe Ruth. School boards are accountable for parents. If they're charter schools, they're using public money by school boards who are not accountable to anybody other than the parents. They're not like a public school board is accountable to the state legislature.
No, public school board, but as long as you're operating, and there's different ways to build charters. So I like an elected. So again, now you're going to look at what works and doesn't work. I like an elected school board that's accountable to taxpayers and parents. But the failure of some school boards is that you assume knowledge because you're elected.
Right.
Sometimes so are prom kings.
That's
It
the
doesn't-
problem with democracy.
It's a problem with democracy sometimes. And so a lot of times you can elect school boards, and they're very nice folks,
Yeah.
outstanding folks, and they want the best.
Right.
But since they're not vested or knowledgeable in the area, and they don't often see or understand the best of practices, they often can't adopt them, and they can be quite trendy. Because what are the best of practices? So a good school board that invests its energy and time in understanding the best of practices can make a public school outstanding. One of the strengths of the charters, where they are strong, has been that they can often pick a professional school board. And as a result, that school board, because it is maybe more knowledgeable or better trained, produces better outcomes. There are models where you have the oversight board, kind of the corporate board, and a public board that has some input there. If it's all about student outcomes, at some point we've got to look at student outcomes. And every generation, I remember I had to give a speech to the Boy Scouts. And so I looked up Boy Scouts because I didn't know a ton about where they began. But I remember the article that talked about why they were formed. And it said, we have to do something. This is right at the turn of the century. There's a bunch of flat-chested, cigarette-smoking boys that aren't worth a damn. It's going to be the destroying of the nation. And this is in the early 1900s. Okay, well, there's still the same folks saying that. But again, and now the other side of that story, a speech I heard, we were actually at a computer show when we had a computer consulting company. And the gentleman was one of the people that when they had taken over our first embassy in when was it, the early 70s, they'd taken over the first embassy. He was actually a colonel over there, but he was in plain clothes and leaving. Got picked up and was prisoner of war for a year. And so they were talking about, and I'd heard his style speech before. He was talking about circle of influence, circle of concerns. Focus on those things you can influence, not those things that concern you. But he gets done with his speech, and it's in Shelby, Montana, so all the small communities are here. And someone in the crowd raises their hands. This is probably the 80s, and they said, well, with all you went through for this nation, what do you think of the state of today's youth?
What do you think, Butch?
The state of today's youth.
Oh.
And he stopped and he paused and he said, you know what, I got a question for you. How many of you in this crowd can identify the 3 most troublemaking kids in your school? About all the hands went up. And he said, how many in this crowd can identify the 3 best kids? Those kids are getting straight A's, maybe a single parent doing all that, and hardly anyone up. He said, what I think about today's youth, it's the best generation ever. They have different challenges. They face different things. You know, in our world, it's all about information overload. I couldn't get information. Like when you went to school, it was all about you couldn't get information. Now you can't sort through the volume of information, the garbage from. But it's different. It's a different time. He said, but this generation is the best generation ever. Different challenges, different parents, different anything. And when we realize that, and we focus more on what this generation can do, instead of constantly talk about its failures, and focus on them, then things will be good. Conrad Schools needs to evolve. All schools do. Because we were training people with bells and cells. We were training for factory workers, right? And so a bell rang, ching, 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 and you went and you sat in your cell for an hour or whatever it was, and you went at the factory, the whistle rang and you got your break. Well, that's how our schools run. They're like prisons right now. Now, you can have expectations, but truthfully, it's almost criminal in today's world where you have all the technology where you can individualize the process. If it takes me an extra 2 weeks to do the math class, but you can do it in 6 weeks, why do you have to sit in the seat for a year? Why can't you move on? And why do I get an F if I just needed 2 weeks more to pass? Why can't I individualize the practice? With today's tools, why can't I
Do you have teachers in Conrad who see things that way? Any of them?
It's evolving.
It's evolving.
Okay.
But it's a hard concept. Because the concept of sage at the stage, stand in the middle of the stage and teach to the midpoint of the room has been around for a long time. Meanwhile, you're too fast for the lowest, right? And far too slow for the highest. Both ends are causing you trouble. And we recognize them as the outlaws, and we talk about how bad they are. But at some point, we do need to evolve education. I don't care whether it's a charter. I don't care whether it's public ed. All I care is that we produce the best student opportunity possible.
You use the concept of STEM here. Is that a big deal?
Science, technology, yep.
Is there pressure on girls to do that as well as boys?
STEM, yeah, there's an increased pressure on the STEM.
But not a huge amount.
Not huge, though.
Not in Conrad, anyway.
Not in Conrad.
I mean, you'll have, the larger towns will have sections of programs devoted to it, but the rural schools, you just can't hire enough teachers to track.
That. I know Conrad through the IO, and
right.
The IO gives a lot of attention to girls' sports, and to not only in sports but in other competitive ways. I don't know if there's a Boys Nation or Girls or United, something having to do with public affairs or civics, where there's a competition, and Conrad did quite well in that. I can't remember the.
Yeah, no, Conrad usually is fairly well thought of. The public, there's 417 school districts now. Local control works pretty good in the state of Montana with some obvious failings. The public school model has failed to reservations terribly. With its current setup, it doesn't work there. And we keep sending more money is not going to change it. It's somewhere we've got to look at some change in the model, because you can't hardly do it worse.
Yeah.
Because we're failing.
The Tulalip, there are 5 tribes in Tulalip. I know about them because of the casino, which I attend and enjoy. But one of the reasons I enjoy it, David and I talk about this a little, is they do a lot of welfare. And I mean that in a positive sense, not the negative, for the very thing we're talking about. Their kids get really excellent programs. Consequently, they test out quite well. I know John McCoy is a senator, the only Indian senator in the Washington legislature. He was a House member, he was a major in the Air Force, got out, got involved in development, and then into politics. And we met marching in a parade, and he's a businessman's person, but he's got a great sense of this meld of what we're talking about, that you need to take money and invest in incentives for people to perform better, both in the classroom and kids. And they also invest, they make enough money that they invest in like 400 different charities in the western Washington area, including in Seattle. So it's, I'm talking too much about that, but it's an issue to me in Montana particularly. As you just said, I totally agree. The reservations fail. They're the worst real social institution in the state of Montana. And yet there are people like Juno that come out that are very well educated, do a good job.
Absolutely.
But see, private, off the record, she told me that she would support charter schools on the reservations because the all public. Well, now she said I can't do it publicly because the party wouldn't like it. But see, to me, that is wrong. I'd do it anyway.
Yeah.
I went to one of millions of seminars, but somewhere along the way there was it was either inner city Chicago or New York, but they were talking about a similar thing, and that's what made me actually probably a little more accepting of the charters than I had historically been, was failed area town, black there, black, predominant black population, and doing very poorly. The guy came back. He was actually had been in the military, and I believe he'd been a minister in the military. But he'd gotten one of those dollar type things where you get a whole base given to you for a community. And he started this charter school there in this community, and he had the ability to board at some level, board kids, but it wasn't a boarding school. However, if you felt insecure or unsafe at home, you could spend 2 or 3 days there. And under some scenarios where you were failing, you did have to spend a couple nights there. He got that all set up. And it was interesting, in about a 3 or 4 year period, he took what was a hugely failing community and with a different model, a much more structured model, he changed the grades around. He became competitive with all the area, all white schools. So I read all that and I thought about it. And then I was reading that book, Good to Great or Great by Choice. That's out. There's 2 of them. I can't remember which one this was in, but what's Collins wrote it. Jim Collins wrote it. One's Good to Great and one's Great by Choice. And they were talking about schools in California. 2 failing schools, both non-English speaking and failing. And what had happened into those schools, in one came a lady principal that was just no excuses. When the teachers came to him and said, well, we can't do well in English because it was just, I don't want to hear what you can't do. I want you to tell me how you're going to solve the problem. I don't want to hear what you can't do and solve the problem. And the other one just kept the traditional, it's not our fault type approach. They looked at them 4 or 5 years later. The one school was again competitive with all the best schools, and the other one was still failing. And so I think somewhere our kids deserve more than an acceptance of failure. I can't change the parents. I wish I could, but I can change how we approach the problem.
Do you think that would, let me give you an example. My niece and her husband taught in a small town in Montana for quite a number of years, and then they transferred to another small town. And they reported to me rather strikingly that in contrast to the first town, where they really were having a lot of success with the kids and the community was supporting of them, when they got to the second town, they said a lot of the population is people who are transient and moving through, and they're living in sort of a temporary housing, but they're here for a couple of years, something of that sort. And their approach is quite different, that when the teachers were demanding, they came and
pushed back,
and they were threatening the teachers and that sort of thing. And I thought, gosh, how disappointing after all of the experience that you had of really having an impact.
Without a doubt, if you can have a stable parent crew, you're better off. But you can't. If you can't have it, you must not use it as an excuse to not provide the program. in our surrounding school areas, and now I haven't looked at the numbers probably in 3 or 4 years, but there was a superintendent meeting in Shelby. And I always liked listening to the superintendent's complain. And what I liked listening about him is the superintendent in Cutbank was the most forceful of all the personalities. And so I listened to Shelby talk about socioeconomics and the challenges because we've got more transients. And I listened to the Conrad guy and all this. And by then, because I have access, I can pull all the map scores. I can pull all the scores. Well, the interesting part is the highest, they usually link it to at-risk. Highest at-risk population is Cutbank. And so he was sitting there saying nothing, the Cutbank superintendent. Finally, I said, well, of all you guys in the room, who has the biggest at-risk population? And he said, well, Wade Johnson. Well, and I said, Wade, when I look at all these scores, you're near the top in math, you're near the top in English, and how are you doing that? He said, because I don't listen to the excuses. He said, you know what, I don't care if the parent didn't get up in the morning. I can't change that. But when the kid comes to my school, he's going to learn English. When the kid comes to my school, he's going to learn math. I can't change the parents. I can only change what happens within my doors. And so I don't tolerate being told that there's no way to educate those kids. As long as you're intolerant and say, we will find a way.
So he's supporting the teachers over the parents.
He did. And he said, so he leaned into we will find a way. And as a result, his outcomes were better. Because we all wish for the perfect mom and dad parents. And it'd be great if this was Pleasantville and it was all, but none of us had the Pleasantville of the past. So how do you, in today's world, with all its disruptions, prove the best education opportunity possible? And it may not be the same for Conrad as it is for Fairfield, as it is for Great Falls. But I would hope we're dynamic enough to do that. And that we don't worry whether the label is private or public or charter. In the end of the day, I would steal the best of practices from whoever's doing it the best in that environment.
Lou, do you think Montana has more opportunity to do that than most other states?
Yes, we have many districts. We can make lots of changes. Now, our challenge will get us sometimes is folks will say, we didn't do it that way in the good old days.
Right.
Well, airplanes didn't fly either once upon a time, and trains didn't run before they did. I know that we taught only math and English and it worked, but that's not today's world. If I look at today's world, we own a number of businesses. I do more business on this phone than I do on a computer anymore. So why would you limit the phone from the curriculum? Because that's where I look stuff up. That's where I look at spreadsheets. Why? It's the world it is today. So how do you provide outstanding student opportunity today? And if you can help the boards do the best of practices, tolerate no excuses. I can't stand it when people say it's just a bad generation of kids. Every generation says that. These kids have different challenges. But just like you said, they work hard. I've never had an issue with a team working hard. I've never had an issue with a group working hard. As long as they know you really genuinely want them to do well and care about them, and then find a way. Some of them I yell at. Some of them I sit down and I talk to and I say, what are you thinking? Why are you doing this? Rarely do we not have our current conversations are about choices and self-discipline. And I've been on that for the last 3 or 4 weeks, just solid. You all have a choice this morning. You all have a choice. You can choose to cheat on this exercise. Are you cheating me or are you cheating you? What's the little demon on the shoulder telling you? Are you listening? You have a choice. It's through discipline. If you can control your undisciplined mind, where are you going to be? It's a choice. And it seems like as long as you can keep on it, they learn.
Let me ask you a question about the nation versus Montana, because one of the purposes of this trip for me personally is to get us, I grew up in Montana. I'm a third generation. We first got here in 1864. And so I've been handed down a set of principles that I think of as Montana principles. Talk about your shoulder. It wears on my shoulder.
Yep.
And I read the international news. I read the national news. I read the Montana news through Buck and through the Missoulian and any way I can get it. And there's this sense that maybe Montana kids aren't ready for the world, aren't ready for the nation, aren't ready to volunteer and fight, aren't ready to volunteer for Peace Corps, aren't ready to do it in the way that kids in San Francisco or New York City might be. So what do you think Montana kids are less nationalistic or less patriotic than they used to be, or more?
If I had to think about the patriotic, I would think that there's probably, there's less sense of nation across the nation than there was before. But I wouldn't think Montana would be less. I would actually say it's almost the other way there. I would think, there seems to still be some pretty good spirit. I think there are some challenges in the teaching field. Some of them are just, again, the model. One was, to be brutally honest, the glass ceiling that kept women from doing anything other than you didn't have women in
Kindergarten.
Yeah. I mean, there weren't women docs. There weren't women. There was very few women docs. They were either teachers or nurses. Well, now that population doesn't see their top field to be teaching, I think you've had probably some degradation in the midpoint of the level of teachers we get. I believe that happens, and I do believe that a lot of the education process isn't. No one's really talking about what it takes to be a nation, or even an education in capitalism and economics. So you do see some degradation there, but I'm not sure that's the kids' fault, because I think the kids would learn capitalism if you taught it to them. I think they learn economics.
Did you go to school here, grade school? Where'd you go to
I
college?
went to grade school at little country school out about 8-9 miles that way.
Okay.
6-person country school.
Yeah.
I went to high school here. I went to MSU.
Okay. And then, did you do some graduate?
I did my graduate work at MSU. I had a PhD to go to Berkeley, but I had 3 little boys.
Uh-huh.
So I went out to Berkeley and decided that I had a full ride PhD. I often wonder if I shouldn't have done that, but I didn't want to raise my little boys. We didn't want to raise the kids.
Well, how could you afford it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it was
It's tough. We went to Berkeley, and we had kid. Well, I had a kid.
Yeah, it's
I had
It was always touch and go.
yeah. It would have been tough. It was back then. They were willing to pay me $1,200. I was real handy with computers and programming and statistical analysis software. So they were willing to pay me $1,200 a month and waive all fees to go to school, which then was pretty decent, but it would still been. But it was, we started thinking about making a difference in the lives of kids, and so I actually came back for just a year to get reset, and then kind of answered every computer question in the area. So formed a computer consulting company, and then started finding stuff to buy and sell. And
So you came directly here, back to Conrad.
Yeah.
And your folks were from here.
yeah, it's but see, I couldn't afford to go to school even here. I couldn't go year round, but there was quarter system. So I could afford 2 quarters, and I'd have to work 6 months. Mm-hmm. But I always took a lot of credits, like 21, 20. I got my undergraduate in like 3 years because I took so many, So it was like anything else. You just worked at it. It was.
Did you go to school here, Karen?
I did for a year and a half. I grew up in Bozeman and Missoula.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
So where'd you go finish high school?
Here. This is where I finished high school.
Okay. But then, did you go
Then
to
I went
college?
to MSU. Yeah.
And MSU.
Yeah. Took me a little longer because I was the one that had the kids.
So did you teach school at all?
No, I didn't. We came back at a time that there was lots of farmers' wives that were teachers,
Yeah.
and so all the jobs were filled.
Yeah.
So when he started getting more into computers, he kind of roped me into that, and then we just have worked together since then.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, you seem quite successful. I mean, not just the business sense, but in the human sense. The best, my feeling is, I worry about small towns everywhere. It isn't just peculiar to Montana or the United States. I know quite a bit about China and Burma and India, and those small towns are in deep shit all over that part of the world. And there's a social consequence to that for those countries, not so different than our own social consequence. And that thing in India is making a huge difference. families now that never even had banks or any kind of national institution can get money transferred there on a federal program. It's just profound what's happening in India within 10 years. So there's a kind of optimism in my mind. David chaired a big program we had for libraries in Burma. We got 1 million books out there and over 1,000 libraries we helped, and there's several million Burmese kids have a different life to some degree then because of that project. So people can take initiative and really make a difference for kids, and the small town kids in Burma, I don't find have a life that much different anymore than my granddaughter who's in Missoula because of this.
Yes, but we have to leverage. See, so we took in, we changed the education in, I don't know, 03, 05, brought that digital academy in. And again, it wasn't an attempt to replace teachers with digital either, but you had to take a look at these small town environments, and you had to take a look at the opportunity set, since just having an education of only math and English isn't sufficient anymore, and you couldn't often even get math teachers there. So now, between the dual credit and the digital delivery, well, my daughter will graduate, our daughter this year, next year will graduate with her associate's degree at the same time she gets her high school. In fact, she'll have her associate's degree before she has her high school diploma, because she can take the classes dual. And so you can take oceanography in Conrad. Now, now you have to overcome the bricks and mortar reluctance, because the bricks and mortar in the little places, 40 years ago when I went to school, we didn't do that. Yeah, but 40 years ago, even if you didn't graduate from school, you could have probably earned a pretty good living. But now, when you look at the returns, you're going to have a higher education. And I'm not saying everyone has to do that, but we have to
Do many of her friends see the world the way she does?
It's evolving. It isn't her friends. You can get the kids there. More so. No, you can get the kids there. The kids don't have an issue. It ain't the dang kids. It's the parent. It's the parents, and it's the school.
You have to have a what?
You have to have the conversation.
You have to have the conversation. It's the school. The school itself is scared of change. The school will push back and say, "Oh no." They'll feel like, "Well, you're threatening a teacher." I'm not threatening a teacher. If you can't teach Chinese in Conrad, I know you can't teach Chinese in Conrad. And potentially, if you only have one kid taking Spanish, you can't keep a Spanish teacher either. We've got to recognize what works and what doesn't work. And again, at some point, it's criminal to say, if we are making this all about, oh my goodness, we're quote-unquote threatening a teacher, then so we're saying it's okay then to limit student opportunity because we're scared of change. And it's the bricks and mortar that get you. Because today, why is it when you graduate from high school in today's world, you're going to have a third of the kids that are struggling to keep up, right? A third that's in the middle. It's more diverse than that, but basically, why can't we have people graduate that have already had
Let
a
me
well?
put a hypothesis to you. Can you imagine Conrad in 40 years when your kids are sort of in your position? Without schools, but with a library.
Potentially.
Without bricks and mortar.
Yeah.
But with a library full of librarians who do what teachers do now. Only it's all that way.
Yes, but you'd have
I'm
to.
not advocating, I'm just asking you to imagine.
You'd have to watch the failing in that as an eighth grader, as an eighth grader, seventh grader. So how do I say that? Is somewhere around 6th grade, testosterone boils the brain, and suddenly the focus starts.
Maybe return to boys in this lane and girls in this lane.
Yeah, but I mean,
Seriously.
so they're kids. But I mean, you're going to have to recognize that part of what we provide, you can have a room full of geniuses and a computer for them to learn geometry on, and at some point they'll be more likely to pay attention to each other than the computer. So I'm not saying the person in the room needs to be an expert in geometry. But we have to also remember these little animals are young, and they're fun little animals, but if somebody doesn't apply some discipline, the little animals are more likely...
Librarians are famous for discipline.
Okay, so as long as we make sure they stay on task, I believe you can do a lot of things. But we can't just abandon them in a room with machines because
So you're ready to keep Texas going to schools?
We're going to have to
I'm thinking about taxes just going to libraries.
Oh, libraries itself. I think we need to. I do believe a good teacher is critical. I don't necessarily believe you need the subject expertise you used to. I do believe you need.